Hello. Firstly, I hope you're keeping safe and well during these difficult times. Thank you very much for downloading this on-demand webinar. We're calling it Clearing During COVID-19, Strategies to Help Universities Thrive During a Global Pandemic. We expect it to run for about 30 minutes or so, and we hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we've enjoyed putting it together. My name is Toby Margetts, and I head up the strategy team here at Squiz. With me, I have Asha Barwell, who is one of our senior account managers, focusing exclusively on the HE sector. Say hello, Asha.
Hi.
So as you'll be able to appreciate, the contents of this webinar has changed a fair bit since we began working on it a month or so ago. A lot has changed in that time, and it's likely that this year we'll see some anomalous trends as students and HE institutions try to navigate these unprecedented times. That said, we still think it's going to be useful to have a look at the historical clearing trends and the driving forces behind the changes we're seeing. We'll try to quantify just how important clearing has become in terms of monetary value, and we're going to talk about how HE institutions can engage students more effectively during and in the lead up to clearing. This all, of course, will be delivered through the lens of COVID-19, which presents some serious challenges, but of course also some really great opportunities. So just a real quick one on Squiz for those that don't know. We're a global technology and digital services company. Our mission is to provide our customers with the tools and the know-how to create more meaningful interactions with their customers. The business is about 20 years old. We work across a number of sectors, of which HE is, of course, a big one. Over that 20-year period, we've worked with around 60% of all HE institutions in the UK as well, in some capacity. So we've got a lot of great experience that forms the basis of this webinar. So first up, we're going to take a look at clearing in numbers and how they've changed over the last 5 or 6 years. In 2019, there were 495,620 applicants placed into a university in the UK. Of that number, 66,410 were placed via clearing, which equates to 13.4%. That number includes all clearing placements, whether it's through the traditional route, adjustment, or going direct into clearing. Just to clarify a few of the terms we use there, and apologies if we're teaching anyone to suck eggs, but I think it's super useful to be clear about exactly what we're talking about here. When we say the traditional route, that students that typically have selected a firm and insurance choice but have failed to attain the exam results that will allow them entry onto those courses, and so they go into clearing. Adjustment is basically the opposite, whereby students have achieved higher than expected results and so no longer want to go to their firm or insurance choice and instead may look for a more prestigious option. And finally, we have the direct to clearing students that, for whatever reason, didn't select a firm or insurance choice and instead were happy to go straight into clearing without any prior applications. So that 66,410 and the 13.4%, these are figures that have been growing consistently for many years now. If we look specifically at the number of applicants placed via clearing since 2014, we can see a fairly consistent rise. In 2014, there were 59,960 placements via clearing. So in 2019, the 2019 figure, of 66,410 represents an almost 11% increase since 2014. It's also a 6.2% increase from last year. And what's really interesting is that 11% increase over 5 years has happened despite overall applicant placements remaining pretty stable. We've seen just 1.4% growth over that 5 years, meaning the popularity of clearing is actually growing at a disproportionately high rate. There is also a disproportionately large rise in applicants going directly into clearing, as evidenced by this chart. As I mentioned earlier, these are students that bypassed the traditional application model and chose to go straight into clearing. And the number choosing to do this has risen by nearly 50% from 10,720 in 2014 to 15,760 in 2019.
So following on from that, we want to highlight some really great research done by Net Natives in the National Clearing Survey 2019 into clearing applicant behaviour. This graph shows that there's been a significant change in when students start researching their clearing options. In 2019, 27% of students were researching clearing prior to their exam period. That figure was just 18% in 2018. This suggests that an increasing number of students are open to the possibility of clearing before they even know their exam results. This one might be a little tricky to read, but it's looking at exactly what type of clearing related information students are looking at prior to results day. It's been broken down by persona, but if we focus on the overall column, we can see that the most popular answers here are how the clearing process works, when clearing opens, universities that are actually offering clearing, and courses with higher entry grades. This is all incredibly useful information for marketers and content writers looking to create engaging and compelling campaigns. And finally, another graph from the National Clearing Survey here, this time looking at social media habits of clearing applicants. Over time, we're seeing a large drop-off in Facebook usage. It's down 37.5% in terms of daily usage compared with 2016-17. Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, and YouTube are by far the most popular platform amongst students. A relatively newcomer to the market, TikTok, is showing strong early growth and is likely to gain in popularity over time. Again, this is all vitally important information for anyone looking to engage students before and during clearing.
So we know that clearing has become more popular. The question is why? Why are more students and a greater proportion of students going through clearing versus the traditional process? As you might expect, there are a number of reasons, and we're going to explore what we consider to be the most pertinent ones. Firstly, there is simply more choice for students. Today's students find themselves in a buyer's market. 2020 has the lowest forecast of number of 18-year-olds in the UK population. This, combined with the fact that caps were lifted in 2015, allowing institutions to enrol as many students as they like, means that demand is way down and supply is way up. Students hold the cards and, by definition, are more likely to find a place via clearing than in previous years, since they're competing with fewer students and there are more places available. As a sign of the times, it's worth noting that in the summer of 2019, Cambridge University offered places via clearing for the first time in its history. A good analogy for this buyer's market is to think about buying a house. Imagine being the only house buyer in an area where there are 20 houses for sale, all up for the same price. Those sellers have got to do something very special to get your attention. To further that analogy, it would be like a house buyer having to choose their favourite and second favourite house in an area 18 months before they'd saved up enough money or gone through the financial checks enabling them to get a mortgage. This is essentially what A-level students are required to do: decide on the course they want to study and choose 2 institutions they'd like to study it at, 18 months before they'd be able to enrol and 18 months before knowing if they'll achieve the grades to get in. So imagine the house buyer 18 months later, it turns out that they saved up more money than they thought, and their circumstances mean that they need more space than they originally thought. Much like a student might achieve better grades than they thought or experience a change in their personal circumstances. The ability to release themselves into a market with more options suddenly becomes very appealing, which brings us nicely on to the next point. 2019 saw the introduction of clearing self-release. This allows any applicant who already holds a place at university to release themselves into clearing in order to apply to a different institution. Previously, students had to contact their chosen university and ask to be released before they could apply elsewhere. And as you might imagine, this typically wasn't an easy or enjoyable process for either party. The problem with this was that universities tended to be pretty busy on results day. So when a student rings up and explains they no longer want to take up a place at that university, the university naturally doesn't consider them a priority and would rather focus on fielding phone calls from the students that actually want to enrol with them. This resulted in huge amounts of stress for students, as their new university would often only agree to hold their place for a limited amount of time. The final reason we've highlighted is that clearing used to be considered a last resort for students that had underachieved in their exams. That perception and stigma has changed, and the evidence points to students increasingly viewing it as a preferential system that gives them more flexibility in shaping their future career. I think this is one of my favourite quotes that really encapsulates that feeling. Clearing used to be like a car boot sale, where you can get some good stuff, but not always the best quality stuff. Now it's like the Boxing Day sales. You can get exactly what you would have got a few weeks earlier.
So we know that clearing has become more popular, and we have a bit of an insight into why that is. So the next question to ask is, why is clearing so important to higher education institutions? The answer ultimately is money, demonstrated here by David Brent. The value of a single student has shot through the roof in recent years. And so even a tiny increase or decrease in enrolments can affect income in a big way. And some universities rely on clearing to recruit up to 30% of their student number. To put this into context, consider these numbers. The first is the average value of a student purely in terms of tuition fees. It doesn't take into account money they'd spend on accommodation in the SU or anywhere else. So it's likely a very conservative number. So it's simply the average tuition fee cost per year in the UK multiplied by 3, the typical length of the UK degree. If we take that top number and then multiply it by the number of students placed via clearing, which is 66,410, we then arrive at £1.83 billion. This is the amount of tuition fees paid by students that have entered into HE via clearing. If we then divide that £1.83 billion by the number of UK universities that offer places via clearing, this is 106, we arrive at the figure at the bottom, £17,269,106. This is the amount of money that clearing is worth to each university that offers it in the UK on average. These are very approximate figures due to the amount of variables, of course, but some universities are much more heavily reliant on clearing than others and take far more via clearing than the average, meaning that this figure is likely to be much higher amongst mid to lower tier universities. It's not an exact science, but if we assume that the average university fills 13.4% of its places via clearing, it becomes clear just how important clearing is to the university's bottom line. Clearing has become the Black Friday of HE for marketers. And with that in mind, it's no surprise that when a Freedom of Information request was made by The Guardian back in 2019, it revealed that many universities, particularly those considered to be mid-tier, have dramatically increased their marketing and advertising budgets in recent years, the highest coming in at a whopping £3.4 million. It's open market competition, and universities have to stand out in order to win students. That's why we're seeing an enormous rise in the number of unconditional offers offered by universities, a 2,175% increase over 5 years. We've gone from around 1 in every 100 offers being unconditional in 2013 to nearly 1 in 5 offers being unconditional in 2018. We've seen universities offering cash bonuses, laptops, gym memberships, and even free flights in exchange for their custom. Undeniably, an impressive return on investment if each student is worth nearly £30,000. We're now going to look at 3 ways in which COVID-19 is impacting HE, both broadly and specifically in relation to clearing.
So the first and most obvious is to address the mass uncertainty. And that's not just for students, but of course for institutions as well. It's this that really is the root cause of change. There are plenty of questions still unanswered, such as exactly how will universities assess prospective students' performance? Can and will offers be changed? Will social restrictions be lifted by September? Will international students be able to travel freely? Will more virtual learning resources be needed? And obviously many, many more. Despite the uncertainty, and according to a recent UCAS and Youth Site survey, 86% of applicants studying A-levels said they were continuing with their application as planned in light of disruption caused by coronavirus. We believe that domestic enrolments will likely drop compared with previous years, but the fall won't be significant. The statistic from the previous slide would support that assumption. We do, however, believe that international recruitment is going to take a big hit. There are approximately 500,000 international students in the UK, which accounts for roughly 20% of the entire UK student population. Many international students outside the EU pay far more in fees than the typical £9,000 per year, and so in real terms, the financial impact of a large drop in international student numbers in September is even greater to universities. We're therefore making this prediction that lower and mid-tier universities' commercial viability is going to be strongly threatened. This is because Russell Group and other universities considered more prestigious will counter this drop in international students by ramping up their efforts to fill the spaces with more domestic students. Prospective students that would otherwise have had to settle for a less desirable university now have a slot opened up for them. It's worth noting, however, that the government have put in place measures to try and combat this, putting in place a temporary cap on recruitment numbers, meaning universities can recruit up to their forecast number for this year, plus 5% more. Of course, the knock-on effect of this is that as each university has its brightest students poached by a more desirable university with places to fill, That university will then target prospective students looking at less desirable universities than themselves, and so on and so on and so on, until you reach the bottom of that chain and there are simply no more students left in the pool. This is where those mid to lower tier universities that can't protect their students, whom have accepted a place with them, from being poached, will really feel the squeeze. To make that a little bit more visual, we provided some data, albeit again slightly simplified data, but it should help us understand how this chain reaction might work, even with the government's assurances that universities can only recruit an additional 5% of domestic undergraduate students on top of their forecasts. This pie chart shows data from 2019, where out of 495,000 placed applications, 133,595 of them went to Russell Group universities. So that's about 27%. So if we take the number of students placed into Russell Group universities in 2019 and assume that the 2020 forecasts are for the same number, we then add 5% to get an indication of the maximum number of extra students they will be able to recruit under the new rules. So that equates to an extra 6,680 student places available at Russell Group universities. Again, this is a simplification, but if we then divide that number by the remaining non-Russell Group universities, which is 106, that comes out at 63. 63 is the average number of students that non-Russell Group universities would lose to Russell Group universities if the Russell Group universities were to fill all their additional spaces. Of course, there are multiple other factors that will influence these figures, including the diminished 18-year-old population, as we mentioned earlier, and of course the further tiering of universities beyond just Russell Group and non-Russell Group universities. We're well aware that the tiering isn't quite as simple as that. These figures are therefore probably conservative, but if we use them, losing 63 students equates to 1.7 million in lost tuition fees alone. Number two is that students will hold even more power than they already do. A smaller population of 18-year-olds and universities with more spaces available put students in the driving seat. That leads us on to our second prediction, which is that the increase in student power will lead to a record percentage of students going through clearing. So firstly, it's worth mentioning that UCAS have absolutely confirmed that clearing will still take place in the summer. Secondly, plans to grade students in lieu of exams being cancelled are still a little unclear and understandably complex. They say this year's results will be based on teachers' recommendations plus statistical moderation by examiners who can change the grades up or down. This combination, they say, is likely to be fairer than the usual exam system, although of course they would say that. Whether or not the system is better than the traditional system remains to be seen, but it would seem to have little bearing on the practicalities of clearing in 2020. This is because the vast majority of students hoping to go to university in September will have already made their firm and insurance choices and will now be waiting for their final grades, albeit not via exam results, in order to see whether they've met, exceeded, or fallen short of expectations. But as universities seek to make up for losses in international recruitment, it's highly likely that plenty of courses at top universities are going to have spaces left. For those that do better than expected, clearing or adjustment might have been the natural choice anyway. But for those that did as well as expected, or maybe even worse, may fancy their chances of finding a course at a better university, knowing full well universities aren't going to be beating students away. The final point is, optimistically, that we believe there will be a rebound. However, we do think the legacy of COVID-19 will be pretty permanent. That is to say that the sector will recover and it will thrive. Our third prediction is that 2021 will see record numbers of applications and enrolments to UK universities, both domestically and internationally, as confidence is restored globally and an unusually large amount of students that deferred enrolment by taking gap years return to higher education. It's essential that universities are equipped to connect and engage with these types of students as early as possible.
So how can universities stand out and avoid finding themselves at the bottom of the chain reaction that we mentioned earlier? The first tactic is to start early. Earlier in the webinar, we learned that students are increasingly proactive and are starting their clearing research earlier than ever, with 27 starting before the exam period. We know that the vast majority of clearing marketing budgets are usually allocated to the August rush during and following results day, and rightly so. But such a day this year won't exist. Universities will give themselves an enormous advantage if pre-clearing content and campaigns are underway by the spring, and the bulk of the budgets can be applied to the period of time whereby students will discover their final grades. Tied to this is brand awareness. 85% of clearing students have already heard of the university they enroll with, and 77% have visited the website of the institution before clearing. This would suggest that students have more trust in institutions that are already on their radar. That could be a billboard campaign on the London Underground, paid ads on social media, cost per click on Google, or perhaps a viral TikTok video. And following on nicely from that is the idea of gathering data. Early engagement with prospective students should focus on brand building and ideally have an element of data capture built in. The more data you can collect on potential customers, the more effectively you can use that data to help move them down the funnel, and the more likely they are to enroll at your institution. Next, know your personas. Gone are the days when clearing was just for students who'd messed up their A-level results. Clearing has become a preferential route into higher education for many students, and it's important that institutions recognise this and tailor their engagement strategies accordingly. In the NetNatives 2019 National Clearing Survey, it was revealed that just 41% of those placed via clearing are the traditional clearing students that have typically underachieved in their exams. 33% went direct to clearing, 22% were considered mind changers, whereby they are entering clearing for reasons other than their grades, such as social or environmental factors, and 4% went into clearing due to overachievement in order to try and secure a more prestigious university. That's a whopping 59% of students that are considered non-traditional, and each of these persona types has varying needs, pain points, motivations, and behavioural traits that affect how they choose an institution with which to continue the higher education. If you know your customers well enough, you'll know the kind of content they respond to, whether they're more likely to be male or female, which courses they're most likely to study, how to best meet their needs. In addition, you'll know where they are, which platform they prefer, which devices they use. So let's say, for example, you're running a campaign to encourage direct to clearing applicants to choose your institution. We know that they tend to be 60% female versus 38% male, and 22.5 years old on average. We know that this type of applicant typically looks for institutions that are close to home. We know that this type of applicant favors Instagram, YouTube, and Snapchat over other forms of social media. Armed with this information, it becomes infinitely easier to create great content and disseminate it on the right platforms in order to engage the correct persona. So track, measure, and optimize. In order to continually prove and improve the value of any clearing-related activity, it's essential to measure its impact. Executives will always be seeking a return on investment. This will include ensuring goal tracking and attributions are correctly set up in Google Analytics. It means measuring impressions, likes, shares, comments, views, and click-through rates on social media ads. It might mean setting up a custom landing page that you drive people to from an offline billboard ad. Understanding what worked well and what didn't can help create remarketing lists so you can engage with potential students that have already shown your institution some love, drastically increasing your chances of converting them.
So next is innovate. To truly stand out as an institution, you'll need to offer potential customers something different. You'll need to create something that is designed with user needs firmly at the heart and that isn't just a gimmick. So back in 2015, five years ago now, we at Squiz designed and built a matchmaking application for the University of Salford. The idea was conceived off the back of research that revealed students going through clearing were overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, and didn't really like the traditional methods of contacting universities. This matchmaker allowed prospective students to input some details about their situation, for example, the subject areas or careers they were interested in pursuing, maybe the number of UCAS points they'd achieved. The matchmaker would then serve a selection of courses to them that matched those preferences, and the user could view details about each course before deciding whether or not to match with a right swipe or pass with a left swipe. Think Tinder meets higher education. Following a match, users were then invited to contact the university in order to try and secure their place. The idea was really successful. We had around 10,000 students actually use the matchmaker on results day. Site engagement was up 264%, and the number of offers made by Salford via clearing was up 28% on the previous year. It was even featured in a bunch of national newspapers and other media outlets. That was 5 years ago, as I mentioned, and as we've learned, clearing has moved on, and so has web design, frankly. For 2020, we've actually augmented, upgraded, and redesigned the Matchmaker for the modern student. The working title is Matchmaker 2.0, very original, and it looks a bit like this. It's a slicker, leaner, progressive web app, which still behaves a bit like Tinder with its swiping functionality, but we've drastically upgraded the UX and the UI. Going from left to right, we can see a potential student presented with some option bubbles. They can tap courses or careers that interest them, and on the second screen, they can input how many UCAS points they have. The third screen shows a user swiping yes or no on their matches, and the fourth screen shows a user looking at a course in more detail. It is worth noting, actually, that a couple of weeks ago it was announced that UCAS would be launching Clearing Plus. For those that haven't heard, it's an application that works actually very similar to the Matchmaker, but actually spans all universities. And with that in mind, we're considering tweaking the Matchmaker a little bit to focus on year-round course finding rather than just to be for clearing. We're working with a couple of institutions currently on this, but of course, I would always love to hear from anyone that thinks it may work well for them as well.
Another idea that we've been working on is something that we're calling the graduate story stream. It's a feature that allows higher education institutions to showcase their best graduate stories to prospective students. It looks like this. It has the ability for users to filter by things like course, year of enrollment, and type of student. The graduate cards shift in real time to meet the filter inputs so that the user can quickly find a graduate story that is relevant to them. The overriding purpose is to inspire prospective students and give them confidence and reassurance in their choices. We'll do this by showing users previous graduates that have excelled in their careers having completed the same degree. This might include logos of companies they've worked at, salaries, location pins of where they've worked, industry awards, and more.
Next, we've been working on a clearing chatbot. So there are a number of different use cases for the chatbot, and we're able to deploy them very, very quickly at Squiz, sometimes in under a day. The use case we've illustrated here shows a prospective student's three initial options. So they land on the chatbot and they're served three options. Number one, I'm interested in a specific course. Number two could be show me courses with spaces available. Number three might just be a more general show me what it's like to study at the University of Squiz in this instance. In this case, the user chooses option one, I'm interested in a specific course. They're then shown a few more clarifying options as to whether they're looking for an undergraduate course, a foundation course perhaps, or maybe short courses. And again, this isn't obviously an exhaustive list, just kind of some examples. We haven't visualized the rest of this journey in the webinar, but the scope is pretty broad here. Users could find out more information about the course they're interested in. They could then learn about the university as a whole. They could see testimonials from graduates that have done the course. The possibilities really are quite endless for something like this.
Next, we have the concept of a COVID-19 hub. This feature acts as a one-stop shop for students of any kind to learn about more of the implications of COVID-19. Whether it's a prospective international student that needs reassurance to enroll, or an existing student that needs to understand when a campus is likely to reopen. There are multiple use cases for such a hub. And then finally, what we're working on, or we're doing a lot of work on with universities, is virtual open days. Demand has gone crazy given that the next best thing to a physical open day, which of course have been rendered impossible to provide for the time being. Again, there are endless features and functionalities for virtual open days. Not everything will be suitable for every university, but here we've prototyped an interface that lets prospective students take a 360-degree campus tour and speak with lecturers at predefined times. It's not shown here, but the prototype also includes the ability to view graduate stories, learn more about the town or city, and even experience a lecture through a Zoom call.
So that's it from us. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the webinar. Hopefully there's been some food for thought in there, and it can help supplement your current and future clearing campaigns. If anyone has seen or heard anything they're particularly interested in, we'd of course love to hear from you. Many of the solution mock-ups we've shown here, we've actually prototyped, and so we'd be more than happy to share them with you if you'd like to have a play around with them. Mine and Asha's email addresses are available on this slide as well. You'll also notice Greg Adams' email on there. He's one of our sales guys here. Again, would love to hear from anyone who's got any questions, any thoughts, any feedback even around what you've seen and heard today. So yeah, thanks very much again. Stay safe and goodbye.
Bye.